The Muslim Brotherhood. An interesting organization based out of Egypt, which has now spread to a multitude of other countries such as Syria, Bahrain, even Russia, the Soviet Union, and to some extent the United Arab Emirates and parts of the Gulf, Lebanon, even Libya. It's a transnational organization based upon the religious precepts of Sunni Islam. Although it's not as sectarian as many other organizations, this group, the Muslim Brotherhood, caters to Sufism as well, or the spiritual sense of Shia Islam. Founded in 1932 by Hassan al-Banna, a school teacher and theologian in his own right, al-Banna wanted to create an organization based upon the religious precepts of Sunni Islam and governed by the Sharia. And the Sharia would be governed by the Hadiths or the Sunnah. Al-Banna himself was an influential figure in Egypt, and basically the foundational members of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt were school teachers, faculty members, highly educated people that were basically threatened to see that other Arab governments in the Middle East, which at this point were led by pan-Arab nationalism, a socialist secular ideology. They feared that these countries are becoming too westernized and that the essence of Islam was being lost. And so al-Banna basically wanted to try and influence many Arab governments in the future. And this way, with the governments being Islamized, the countries themselves can institute laws based upon the precepts of Islam and the Sunnah. And slowly but surely, this would create the caliphate itself. The beliefs or the tenets of the Muslim Brotherhood are based on their website. And I'll read you a quote. Quote, "We believe that the political reform is the true and natural gateway for all other kinds of reform. We have announced our acceptance of democracy that acknowledges political pluralism, the peaceful rotation of power, and the fact that the nation is the source of all powers. We see it, political reform, includes the termination of the state of emergency, restoring public freedoms, including the right to establish political parties, whatever their tendencies may be, and the freedom of the press, freedom of criticism and thought, freedom of peaceful demonstrations, freedom of assembly. It also includes the dismantling of all exceptional courts and the annulment of all exceptional laws, establishing the independence of the judiciary, enabling the judiciary to fully and truly supervise general elections so as to ensure that the authenticity express people's will, removing all obstacles that restrict the functioning of civil society, organizations, etc." Over the many decades since its existence, the Muslim Brotherhood has saw internal reform more than once. The Muslim Brotherhood today claims that they are no more a terrorist organization than, say, Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, in which, to some extent, it's true, they have done internal reform pre the Six-Day War. After the Six-Day War in 1967, the Muslim Brotherhood became more fanatical. And this gave the organization the label terrorist organization by the United States and the United Nations. The Islamic modernist beliefs of the Muslim Brotherhood are co-opted in the beginning by secular rulers and the limas, or the religious sector within the group, being the only available outlet for those who are religious and cultural sensibilities have been outraged by Westernism. And so during the 1930s, the Muslim Brotherhood began to take shape. And around this time, one of its primary members, Sayyid Qutb, an Egyptian theologian and author, visited the United States. And it was when he returned that he basically shaped the future of the Muslim Brotherhood's tenets and their core beliefs by writing such books like Millstones, in which he said that when he visited the United States was basically a wasteful nation, a primitive nation, where he was appalled that people would watch on TV two men fighting, which was boxing. He thought it was brutal and primitive. How people watered the lawn with water. He considered this a wasteful display. Women wearing skirts and having similar rights as men in regards to the work environment. And they really didn't have much in the way of rights back then, but just to go to show you that Qutb saw women in that sector horrifying. He considered that the man should be the household, the woman should be the mother of the household, taking care of the children and the other duties as well. And so he basically returned to the United States, and with this new worldview regarding the West, he basically promoted the fact that Arab governments, led by sociological principles of nationalism, pan-Arab nationalism, were to be liquidated if they could. And in order to do that, they had to impose the Quran and the Sunnah into governments. It was a tall order back then. So when Gamal Nasser became the president of Egypt, Nasser himself was someone who basically adhered to the principles of nationalism, and that he began a huge, strict crackdown on the religious sector in Egypt, which then carried over to Syria and Lebanon. And so this drove this group underground, the Muslim Brotherhood, for the next 25 years. In the 1940s, the 1950s, late 1950s, Nasser then became a little bit more stricter than usual in regards to the religious sector. And so with this, we saw a large influx of Muslims themselves in Egypt become imprisoned. This created a sense of awareness regarding how the religious sector would treat secular ideologies in the future. The Egyptian Security Service, or the SSI, were notoriously brutal under Nasser. This section of intelligence and the treatment of prisoners basically fermented in the future potential proponents of being terrorists or terrorist operatives. This would give way in the future, not under Nasser, but under Anwar Sadat, who took over Nasser's as president of Egypt. Sadat took over in 1970 and became the third president of Egypt. Sadat was more of a reformer than Nasser. Nasser basically was hardline in regards to his principles regarding the government and social sectors within the Arab world. He was a lot more appeasing to the West and the United States, began to open dialogues with the Soviet Union, Japan, in terms of trade. And so Nasser was a very important figure regarding the financial sectors of Egypt. When Sadat took over, he wasn't as strict with the religious sector as Nasser. After the Six-Day War in 1967, which saw the defeat of Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon against the Israeli military, and the capture of some of the land of these countries, including the Golan Heights, the West Bank, Anwar Sadat was a reformer, and he basically wanted to cater to as many of the people, as much of the Egyptian populace as possible. And so he basically relented on the religious sector, or the more fervent religious sector of Egypt. His crackdowns were basically non-existent. And so many of these prisons basically let out hundreds of people within the Muslim Brotherhood, which was growing at this point and grew exponentially in the prison systems of Egypt. In just before Anwar Sadat became president, during the final tenure of Gamal Nasser's presidency, Sayyid Qutb, who was arrested for being involved in the assassination plot of King Abdullah, which turned out to be false, but he was arrested anyway. Qutb was executed by hanging. But Nasser sent Qutb's wife to prison and said that he would spare Qutb's life if only he would apologize to the Egyptian government. Qutb refused and said that he has nothing to apologize for. He had done nothing wrong. And basically what he wanted to do was propagandize the Islamic movement itself. And this was a threat to Nasser. He saw Qutb as the final threat to the country. What he didn't realize by executing Qutb was that by making him a martyr, he basically gave the Islamists of the Arab world momentum to enact further or to coexist further and see the threat as for what it is. And the threat was secular ideology that was permeating in these Arab governments. With the ending of the Six-Day War, the Arab world finally, even to the secular Arab world, basically saw the socialist construct of Arab nationalism as a failure of ideology. The religious sector of the Arab world then began to become the forefront and gain momentum. During the oil boom of the 70s in Saudi Arabia, this gave them the financial backing to spread the ideology of Wahhabism, the founder being Ibn Abdul al-Wahhab, which is an ultra-Orthodox sect of Islam, in Sunni Islam. Some of these precepts are basically within the tenets of the Muslim Brotherhood. Not totally, but some of them. This would set apart the Muslim Brotherhood from other organizations. In fact, some hardline organizations today would consider the Muslim Brotherhood as too moderate. The Muslim Brotherhood under Anwar Sadat began to make the necessary changes. They became a lot more active in handing out pamphlets, literature, being more open in the streets to propagandize for the group itself. What would come out of the Muslim Brotherhood are two other organizations that are more fanatical in their tenets. And that would be the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the Gamma Islamiyah. Now, before it was called the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, it was called Al-Jihad, led by Muhammad ibn al-Faraj, Rafai Taha, and Ayman al-Zawahiri. The Gamma Islamiyah were led by Omar Abdel Rahman. And these groups basically were created out of a militant frame of mind. Most of the members of these two groups basically had members of the Egyptian army within their ranks. In that, Muhammad ibn al-Faraj, who kept a diary in his house and was writing a book about how to overthrow the Egyptian government under Sadat. It wasn't that Sadat was a reformer and was beginning to open relations with Israel, which was another problem in the Islamic mindset, because they didn't forget about the Six-Day War or the Palestinian problem. They saw Sadat as nothing more than a threat to what they wanted in the government, and that was the precepts of the Muslim Brotherhood to Islamize and to have an Arab country led by the Quran and the Sunnah. Sadat was the first Arab president or the first Arab leader to meet with an Israeli leader. Sadat, in his reform or peace with Israel, met with the Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin in 1977. This was brokered by then U.S. President Jimmy Carter, which would be known as the Camp David Accords. The Camp David Accords were very important in that Sadat wanted to open up relations with Israel in hopes of having a coexistence that didn't exist before. It's never happened. So this was a huge deal. Sadat would make an important speech in which he says, quote, "Let us put an end to wars. Let us reshape life on the solid basis of equality and truth. And it is this call which reflected the will of the Egyptian people, of the great majority of the Arab and Israeli peoples, and indeed millions of men, women, and children around the world that you are today honoring. And these hundreds of millions will judge to what extent every responsible leader in the Middle East has responded to in the hopes of mankind. This was a monumental deal breaker in that Sadat wanted to have Egypt as a financial power in the region, one that had a coexistence not just with Israel, but also with other countries like the United States, the Soviet Union, Canada, Australia, in hopes of opening more trade to the country, the prospects of opening more jobs. Also, this was a threat to having more foreigners in the country working those jobs, in which the Islamic sector, or the religious sector, also saw this as a threat to the country, in which a similar a threat was happening in Algeria at this time, in which the French population was becoming a threat to the Islamist sector within the country in terms of the financial sector. And so they had a long civil war, one of the longest civil wars in the region's history. However, Sadat's undoing was coming to an end. And members of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the Gamma Islamiyya began to implement operations in assassinating the third president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat. Led by Aboud al-Zamar and Khalid Islambuli, with Islambuli being a former lieutenant within the Egyptian army. They would assassinate Sadat on October 6th, 1981, in which there was a military procession going on. And as the Air Force was flying overhead, Anwar Sadat was in the front of the podium, right near the front, and a truck came by. And out of the truck popped out a number of these operatives and began shooting at the podium, in which they killed Anwar Sadat. Hosni Mubarak, who was the vice president, was also there, but he was injured. With the death of Anwar Sadat, this created another crackdown within the country on the Islamist sector. With the president now being Hosni Mubarak, they couldn't have asked for a worse alternative to Sadat. Mubarak, who is more in the way of Nasser in regards to his vitriol toward the ultra-Orthodox of the country, began a massive crackdown in the country itself, arresting hundreds of people, even their family members. Very notable individuals saw themselves in Egyptian prisons, such as Torah Farms in Egypt. An investigation began on the assassination of Sadat, in which they arrested Mohammed ibn al-Faraj, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Omar Abdel Rahman, Rafai Taha, Khalid Islambuli, Abu Omar, Zomar, Isam al-Kamari. All these individuals would have an influential part to play in the assassination of Sadat, in which the Egyptian security services, or the SSI, began torturing mercilessly many of these people above and beyond. And this created, once again, it helped create a more fervent factional group within these prison systems. After the arrest of the notable members of Sadat's killers, in which they were hung, other members of the group, like Ayman al-Zawahiri, were released from prison Zawahiri actually left for Pakistan to enter the conflict against the Soviets in 1980. Other members would stay in prison. The Muslim Brotherhood, again, had to go underground. And basically, at this time, they began to reform again within the tenets of the core structure of the group itself. Their foreign relations with other countries, such as the Soviet Union, or Syria, or Bahrain, or Libya, have a very tenable relationship with governments. Because they're basically labeled a terrorist organization, but not to the extent of like Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. The Muslim Brotherhood enjoys charity work. They get millions of dollars from all over the world, mostly from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Syria, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain. But other countries see them as a detriment to the progression of the Arab world. And so there's this untenable relationship within the rest of the world and the Muslim Brotherhood. I think a year ago, the United States considered the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization and should be labeled as such under U.S. President Donald Trump. It is said that the Muslim Brotherhood, through their many charities around the world, basically funded notable terrorist organizations and operatives, including Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Now, whether these fundings from these mosques and organizations, like the Muslim Youth League or the Muslim World League being the biggest Islamic organization in the United States, whether that money went indirectly into the hands of these people over the years, I would say that's a lot more realistic than having a direct transaction to these individuals. And so, what has the Muslim Brotherhood done to influence most of the Arab world? Has it been a plus? Has it been a negative? Well, I would say it's right in between. Because of the number of internal reforms that this organization undertook over the last 80 years, they seem to have a reasonable relationship with certain countries on this planet, but other countries see it as a terrorist organization, even though that they do massive charity work around the world. It is the largest Arab organization on earth, the Muslim Brotherhood. And so I just wanted to give you a simple rundown regarding this organization. I didn't want to go too much into details regarding their links with terrorist organizations, because even though that is questionable, whether they are directly, I would say indirectly that they are, because of the number of organizations that is aligned with the Brotherhood itself regarding charities and mosques all around the world.